tropical jungles, in swamps and streams and stagnant ponds and ditches, breeds the Anopheles mosquito, carrier of the dreaded malaria parasite. Almost 40% of the human beings that inhabit this earth live out their lives in malarious areas. 200 million human beings are today suffering the fevers and chills and disabilities caused by malaria. Each year, 2 million die because of the death that breeds in stagnant waters. For centuries, malaria-stricken families have allowed their crops to rot in the field, each generation suffering as their fathers did before them, living without hope, living without a future. For this is the future that is dying, a future made unproductive by the chills and fevers of malaria. To control malaria, that is, to reduce the prevalence of the disease, began 60 years ago when it was discovered that the malaria parasite is transmitted by mosquitoes. One of the principal techniques employed has been to drain the breeding areas of mosquitoes which carry the malaria parasite. The female Anopheles mosquito issues from an egg laid on the surface of the water and first appears as a larva. As it develops, it changes into a pupa, finally leaving the water as a winged insect. Spraying or covering the surface of the water with oil or DDT kills the larva before it has a chance to develop. Introducing fish and insects that feed on the larvae is yet another technique of malaria control. The public health services of practically every infected area in the world have been heavily engaged in a continuing effort to control malaria. These methods are expensive and must be utilized year after year on as wide a scale as possible. The techniques of malaria control have had some spectacular successes in areas that were easily accessible and where there was sufficient manpower and money to completely destroy the parasite-bearing mosquito in its breeding ground. The techniques of malaria control have therefore been confined largely to centers of population, reducing the prevalence of the disease in only a small portion of the world's infected areas. As inadequate as old control techniques seem to be, they are being continued and must be credited with saving millions of lives and materially improving the economy of many tropical areas. Unfortunately, malaria is a disease of rural areas. The cost of large-scale drainage and of spraying breeding places in the rural tropics with poor or non-existent roads and immense flooded areas is economically impractical. It is economically impractical even when large-scale aerial spraying is employed. For the problem of malaria is as enormous as the world itself. There are millions of square miles of breeding grounds that are inaccessible to man. Breeding grounds that will forever be beyond effective control. As this map shows, almost 40% of the world's population live in malarious areas. A study of the habits of the female Anopheles mosquito revealed a most vital fact. Her favorite food is blood. When this preference is for human blood, transmission of the malaria parasite from infected to uninfected persons becomes possible. After filling itself with infected blood, the female Anopheles mosquito usually rests for several hours on the walls or other surfaces of the home it is in before flying off. Here was a new, accessible, easily supervised battleground in which to direct further efforts against malaria. On the island of Sardinia, the chain of transmission of malaria which carries the parasite from man to mosquito and back to man again has been an unbroken chain of death for centuries. A chain maintained by the fact that the malaria parasite can live for 2 to 3 years in the human bloodstream. To break this chain of transmission, it must be attacked when it is most vulnerable. And that is the period of time the blood-gorged mosquito comes to rest on the walls of its victim's home. In the years immediately following World War II, an intensive survey was made of the incidence of malaria on the island before beginning actual spraying with the new DDT insecticide. It was important to know in what areas the greatest number of parasites thrived. For these were the areas to be attacked first. Larval specimens and blood smears were collected and analyzed. Victims were examined for enlarged spleens, which indicated the presence of the disease. With all this information collected, it was now possible to map out an effective spraying campaign employing techniques first perfected in Italy and Greece. DDT quickly proved its ability to destroy the Anopheles mosquito. And within a relatively short period of time, malaria was almost entirely eradicated on this small island. In this tiny corner of the world, it was demonstrated that malaria could be defeated. Other malaria-infected regions of the world began slowly to add DDT spraying to already existing programs of malaria control. In 1947, in northern India, spraying made an entire region habitable again. In 1951, the Thai government launched a nationwide eradication program. And by 1953, 29% of the population of 23 Asiatic countries had been protected from malaria by spraying. Slowly, the effectiveness of existing malaria control programs was improved. Spraying with DDT and such other insecticides as dieldrin and BHC was proving to be a powerful new tool in the hands of malaria technicians. In Chile, malaria transmission has been eliminated since 1949. In Italy, Argentina, Venezuela, Corsica, Puerto Rico, and the United States, the chain of transmission of the malaria parasite has already been broken, and malaria has either disappeared or is now a rare disease. These programs of eradication took place not in the enormous swamps and jungles of the tropics, but where people live in their homes and sleeping shelters. On April 7, 1954, a disturbing cable was received. From the leader of one of the many malaria teams at work throughout the world came word that in the Far East an alarming resistance to DDT had developed in one variety of malaria mosquito of that region. Greece had earlier reported a similar situation. Here was a warning that could not be ignored. In Mexico City in 1955, at the World Health Assembly, it was agreed that this development of anopheline resistance to insecticides was a danger. Governments were therefore requested to intensify their plans for eradication so that all spraying campaigns will be completed before this resistance materializes in their part of the world. Here was a unique moment in human history. Never before and perhaps never again will mankind possess this power to completely eradicate malaria from this earth. 84 member nations of the World Health Organization are now joined together in a worldwide emergency program to at last break the chain of malarial transmission. The United States International Cooperation Administration, the World Health Organization, and other participating health services are engaged in a race against time which mankind must not lose through forfeit, through lack of concerted effort. On December 5, 1957, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles presented $5 million to the World Health Organization and $2 million to the Pan American Sanitary Organization on behalf of the people of the United States.
This ceremony symbolizes a purpose to which United States policy is dedicated. That purpose is to harness together in a joint effort the total capabilities of freedom-loving peoples to achieve a lasting peace with justice and to lift from the backs of mankind the burdens of poverty, hunger, and disease. Therefore, it is most fitting that the United States today should join with the World Health Organization and the Pan American Sanitary Organization in a unified campaign to eradicate what is possibly the greatest single source of death and sickness in the world today. This is malaria. Last year, malaria attacked some 200 million people. Some 2 million died of the disease. Through these deaths and the weakened condition of those who survived, malaria left its trail of personal tragedy and of adverse effects on industry, agriculture, education, and economic progress. Each year, millions of man-hours of productive labor are lost due to malaria. Our own nation has suffered acutely from this disease. Until recent years, malaria cost the United States over $500 million a year, and an unmeasurable amount of human misery. Our country has now rid itself of this scourge. Yet today, more than 600 million persons in the world are still exposed to this killing and debilitating disease.
60% of the money and effort being made available in this worldwide eradication program is being provided by the governments of the countries in which these programs are underway. The first year of this eradication program is largely devoted to intensive surveying. The areas of greatest infection must be located and mapped out and attacked first. Specimens of mosquitoes and blood must be collected and analyzed. The training of thousands of local anti-malarial technicians this first year is vital to the success of the entire program. The ministries of health of these various nations are performing the major share of the work being done to eradicate malaria. However, the International Cooperation Administration, the World Health Organization, the Pan American Sanitary Organization, and the United Nations Children's Fund are cooperatively assisting with supplies, instructors, and key technicians and other services. The International Cooperation Administration has 25 technical assistance malaria project agreements with malaria-stricken nations. Since malaria parasites usually do not live longer than 2 to 3 years in the human bloodstream, there then follows a 3 or 4 year period of intensive house spraying with DDT or other insecticides. Since the development of insecticide-resistant mosquitoes is inevitable, we must make certain during these years that there will be no malarial blood for them to suck and no parasites for them to transmit. Spray teams travel to every accessible home, hut, or shelter throughout the world for these 3 or 4 successive years to kill the Anopheles mosquito and the parasite it bears. If this spraying has been effective, the reinfection of human blood in any given area will have been prevented. The chain of malaria transmission from man to mosquito and back to man again will have been broken. The 5th year is a year of surveillance, although surveillance may be started earlier and continue several years. House spraying can be discontinued on an area-wide scale wherever the chain has been broken. Any area that shows a recurrence of parasites must be quickly sprayed again. Anti-malarial drugs are distributed to those who are still possibly infected. When not a single case of transmission can be found for 3 years, the area can at last be considered free of malaria. Soon, other nations of the world will be able to join with Italy, Cyprus, Chile, Sardinia, and the United States in proudly proclaiming that they are free of this ancient scourge. At an average cost of approximately 25 cents per person per year, this eradication program could literally transform the economy of the world. The energy liberated from the debilitating effects of this disease has already resulted in great increases in food production. In Mexico, a $5 million per year eradication program has resulted in an additional $18 million in work time that would otherwise have been lost due to malaria. This worldwide campaign to eradicate malaria will help end the poverty of millions whose energy and hope have been drained away by a lifelong anemia caused by the parasites in their blood. Here is one more demonstration of the power of international cooperation, a power that has already proved to be of immense benefit to individuals everywhere on Earth.